Hypnosis has a really weird history, and it's been with us since the 1700s. And in that time, techniques have changed and improved immensely. And lots of hypnotists have come and gone, and lots of weird ones. In the early days, it was all about magnetic currents, which didn't actually exist. But thanks to mesmerism, people thought that they did exist, and sick people often recovered purely because of this so-called animal magnetism. Now, we don't have animal magnetism as far as I know, but when hypnosis was developed in the early days, they thought there was something actually coming out of people's hands, like a magnetic current that could change or heal people. And medical doctor Fran Anton Mesmer was the leading figure here. And he named it animal magnetism in the first place and thought it was something he exclusively had. Mesmer jammed his usually female patients around what was called a baquette. Imagine a big sort of brass bathtub, round, full of water, with things sticking out like rods of iron and wine bottles, and they'd all sit around and hang on to this, and Mesmer would come in, and he'd wear a robe, and he'd have a turban on, and they'd play a glass harmonica, which is banging glasses with water in them and making all these different sounds. He set the environment, and people would twitch and do the funky chicken, but amazingly, sometimes they got well, even though he wasn't actually doing anything genuine. With the robe and the turban and the magic wand he actually held, he was setting the environment that built their belief, and that's how it all worked for him. Now, let's not forget that great scientific device, the magic wand. He used this exclusively in these seances, touching people with it, thinking he was conducting magnetic power to them, and they do the funky chicken and get well. And he went on to actually magnetize trees. He mesmerized trees. He'd fill trees with his magnetic power, and people would show up, touch the tree, twitch, and go crazy, and get well again. But the problem was, it worked even if they went to the wrong tree. So obviously it wasn't magnetism. Mesmer wound up discredited. He died in obscurity. And the bad thing is, he caused a lot of interest and turbulence in his day, but he provided nothing scientific to the field of hypnosis and really gave us nothing of worth at all. Just some wild imaginings and a lot of superstition. Now, with all the weirdness, let's not forget mesmerist James Esdale. Esdale was a British Army doctor. He was highly trained and he was an excellent doctor. And he was sent to Calcutta, India, which was a hotbed of mysticism. And he did amazingly weird work with animal magnetism, again, primitive hypnosis, thinking he was using magnetic currents, Mesmer's methods. He did over 300 operations. Toenails and testicles are the ones that people remember. He cut ingrown toenails out by the roots with a scalpel with no pain and very little bleeding. And he removed 80-pound testicular tumors. Yes, I know it's weird. Now, this was hypnotism that he was doing. He was taking long, involved inductions and throwing them at people and getting other people to come in and pass their hands over them. It was complicated. It took a long time. But Esdale proved that pain could be removed and people would recover from surgery very quickly. So he contributed to the science despite the weirdness. The mortality rate from surgery back then was about 70 or 80%. People would die because of infection and shock because they give you a bottle of rum and tie you up and then start cutting your leg off. Not much fun. But with Esdale's methods, people recovered quickly and the mortality rate dropped through the floor. And now it's actually called the Esdale state, and we teach it in our live classes. Although it took Esdale hours to create a trance using this method, the century that followed, Dave Ellman, amazing hypnosis trainer, created a shortcut. He found a way for people to get into the Esdale state in just a matter of minutes instead of several hours. So let's talk about another interesting case, John Elliotson, a medical doctor in London, England. In the early to mid-1800s, he proved that doctors don't always have a clue as to what's going on, because Elliotson was gullible. Despite being an amazing hypnotist, using mesmerism again, he got amazing results with some people, but he got sidetracked into mesmerism and magnetism and did all kinds of bizarre experiments, especially with two sisters, teenage sisters, the Oki sisters. Some people think it's the Oki sisters, like with an apostrophe, like an Irish name, but it was no Oki. And they showed up and could produce all of these amazing mesmeric phenomena, and they fooled him badly. He thought they were telepathic. He wanted to believe they were psychic, and perhaps they were hypnotized because they certainly did exhibit some hypnotic phenomena, but they made a monkey out of the mesmerist, and Elliotson's experiments destroyed the relationship with the medical fraternity. People thought he was a lunatic, and they distanced themselves from him, especially the British Medical Association's magazine or newspaper, The Lancet. They just slaughtered Elliotson in the press. And let's never forget about medical doctor James Braid in Manchester, England, where I was born. Braid went and saw a magnetizer, another mesmerist, because this is where we're starting to shift into real hypnosis. The man's name was LaFontaine, and he did a demonstration. And Braid was so freaked out watching this because he took a long hat pin and stuck it under the person's fingernail right down to the bottom, which is a crazy thing to do, and the person exhibited no pain. And Braid, as a medical doctor, thought, there is something going on here. But Braid had an experience where one of his patients went into a hypnotic trance before it was called that by staring at a light when Braid was out of the room. He came back, the person was in a trance. And Braid said, hey, it's not about magnetism, it's eye focus. That causes trance. He was partly wrong, because eye focus can cause trance, but it's actually focused attention. You can have your eyes shut, it doesn't matter. It's not the eyes, James. And Braid is known for his eye fixation inductions, which are still useful today. Having someone stare at something, even the old swinging pocket watch or pendulum, focusing the attention can be used to create a hypnotic trance. In fact, Braid was known for creating the term hypnotism, which means nervous sleep. Braid's eye fixation, which was really focused attention, isn't actually something he invented, though. He was beaten to the punch by a man in Goa, India, Abbe Faria, who was a Catholic monk, and he was using eye fixation inductions about 30 years before Braid. Now, this whole fixed gaze induction will cause trance, and it's still useful, but Braid was credited with stuff he didn't actually do. At least he did create the term hypnotism. Well, he didn't. He's known for that, but if you do your research, you find out that he didn't come up with the term at all. He was beaten to the punch by about 20 years by a man called Etienne Félix Denain de Cuvier. A Frenchman beat the Englishman with the word hypnotism and hypnosis, and it's another part of the twisted history of hypnosis. Now, probably the best thing Braid did give us was the whole idea of monoideism. That was his original term for hypnosis. Aren't you glad you're not a monoideist? I'm glad I'm not one. And he changed it to hypnotism, but at least he got the idea of wrapping your mind around one specific idea, and that focus, as Dave Ellman showed, will cause a hypnotic trance after a little while. But what about Sigmund Freud? There's a guy everybody respects, right? Surely that giant of the mind knew what he was doing. Nope. A colleague of his named Breuer was a way better hypnotist than Freud was. Freud did hypnosis, was well trained, but he had some problems. Cocaine use, rubbing it on his gums, caused his dentures to fall out sometimes, and that doesn't really maintain rapport when you're working with a client and you suddenly cough your teeth out into your lap. But he went on to create psychoanalysis and kept people coming back for treatment after treatment after treatment. But I'm sure he wanted to cure them, right? What, an income source like that? I'm skeptical. As you can see, the history of hypnotism is filled with weird people and weird stuff, from tree magnetizers and magic wands to testicular surgeons. But in our search for the unusual, you cannot get any weirder than the greatest hypnotist, in my opinion, who ever lived, Milton H. Erickson, MD. Erickson was a brilliant medical doctor, and he was paralyzed with polio. He spent most of his time in a wheelchair, and he was tone deaf, and his dentures would click when he was talking, and he had a really gravelly voice. But Erickson was, in my humble opinion, the greatest hypnotist who ever lived. I can't hit that point hard enough. As a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, Erickson was a scientific researcher par excellence. He would sit in his wheelchair and tell stories, and people would zone out and go through these powerful trances, and they would change their lives, and everything in their lives would improve. He was known for a couple of key things. Erickson was the creator of conversational hypnosis, when you're not even doing a formal induction, just talking to people. And he could put people into trances just by shaking hands with them, which freaked a lot of people out. Now, both of these things, conversational hypnosis and handshake inductions, are techniques that we teach in the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. So that's our weird and strange hypnotic history. It's not complete, far from it, but it is weirdly interesting hitting all these main points. And at least when future hypnotists look back on this stuff, they'll say that at least one hypnotist was completely normal. And they'll be talking about me. I hope you enjoyed this weird history of hypnosis. If you're interested in learning scientific hypnosis, check out the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy. You'll find a link below this video.